Hello, welcome to The Person of the Therapist. In this series, we're exploring the experience, the wisdom, the insights from clinicians from a variety of different fields. Today, I'm welcoming Jesse Fairchild. Jesse, I'm delighted that you could join me today. And I think that your wisdom, your insights, your experience, you have so much to offer. You have been doing this for decades. You have shifted, I think, really integrating a variety of theories. But how would you describe yourself in terms of your theoretical leaning, the types of therapies that you use, and also the clientele? What is there an emphasis on a special population?
Yeah, well, first of all, thanks for having me, Dee. I'm excited about this. I struggle to define myself in terms of theoretical orientation because I feel like my career, so to speak, has been one of like come what may, right? Whatever shows up at my door, I open the door and try to learn from it and see where it takes me. If I probably, I mean, I'm psychodynamic. I really believe in depth psychology and in the work of the soul, so to speak. I think also I would throw in, person-centered. I really want my clients to lead me where they need to go and kind of
Mhm.
learning to follow and sort of accompany them. And then I try to incorporate a lot of contemplative practices in my work, both guess to take care of myself, but also to model for clients and to practice together, like finding ways to weave that into work.
When
It,
you say contemplative, uh,
mm,
how would you how would you describe that for a viewer who may have um, preconceived ideas about what that might mean?
sure. I think, I try to take a lot of mindfulness practices from wherever I can. So, whether that's something that's rooted in Buddhism or rooted in Christianity or rooted in something else that's sort of more organized, but also the things people do to reconnect with themselves. So, anything, poetry can be contemplative to me. I think I incorporate a lot of like bibliotherapy and kind of trying to find ways to make meaning from the chaos, right? Trying to find that way to just sort of almost envision. I think of Thich Nhat Hanh a lot of times talking about the idea of the water with like sediment in it, that you've got to let it settle so that you can see clearly and understand what's going on. So I think trying to find ways to do that. So slower therapy, not feeling like I have to get somewhere today with someone, but that it's a long journey and we get there when we get there kind of deal. Um, and thinking a lot, right? Like thinking a lot about what's going on and just allowing it to um, connect with other things. I guess I see like the underlying connection of all things and really recognizing that the work we do, um, that my clients are connected to each other and they don't even know it, that I'm connected to them, that my clinicians are connected. Like we're all, there's this just beautiful tapestry of knowledge and understanding and connection that I try to tap into or try to find in when I can slow myself down to do that.
This You really highlight for all of us the importance of depth, and what that really is slowing down the pace and agendas and prescribed ways of working with clients to be much more present, much more immediate to the process. So process is really important to you, and you've used a variety of metaphors even in this few minutes. So metaphor, it seems,
Oh yeah.
is very powerful for you and your exploration. And I love the description that you bring full circle in a very indigenous kind of global way, how your clinicians at the clinic, all of the clients, and even the community, how this is a beautiful weave, a nest, and that it's collaborative rather than power one up, one down. Do you want to describe for us your clinic, your philosophy that you help guide therapists and interns as, and how you nurture this beautiful tapestry?
Sure. So I founded Bodhi, which is my private practice in the area where we are, Cecil County, which is a very rural area in Maryland, in 2011. And it was just, I didn't want to work for somebody else, really. I wanted to do things on my own and just let something be born through me. It sort of arose of its own volition, I think. And so it was just me for a year and a half, maybe 2 years. And then I started, clinicians started showing up and looking to work in the practice. So it grew. And now, 13, 14 years later, we are about 20 clinicians, I think, overall. Many are part-time, work other places. And I like to think, I hope, that Bodhi refreshes them and they come here to do work with the clients they want to work with. We do focus, the idea of Bodhi in Sanskrit really means that the closest you can come to is like awakening, right? So this idea of that we have, when a client comes to me, I don't believe I have any answers. I don't believe I have anything that they don't already have. I'm just reflecting and sort of rooting around in there and trying to figure out what's already there and help them see that. So I think it's about them awakening to what's already really richly encapsulated in their own experience. And so I hope, and I think very strongly that that's what I want to do for clients. That's what I want to do for my clinicians. That's what I want them to do for their clients. I really believe in embodied leadership, right? Like trying to show up and say, I'm flawed, I struggle, I don't always know what to do, but I wait for it and I keep trying and I'm unwilling to give up. And I believe strongly in community, and very much want to be an integral part of our community. And so we've grown from the fit of client and clinician. We all know research shows that's what's important. So we work really hard to make sure that we are matching our clients with our clinicians appropriately, which may sometimes mean somebody's working with someone because that's their specialty. It may sometimes mean that somebody's working with someone because something in my soul said there's some reason this client needs to be with this clinician, and I don't know what that is, but we're going to trust it. And so allowing clinicians to grow into their best selves and to learn about when they thrive and what's difficult for them, and not necessarily avoiding that, but using that as a way to build clinical skill. We really do describe it here as soul work. Like we definitely believe that we are trying to help people get back to that piece of themselves that's unharmed. I would say unbroken, because broken is beautiful, but the piece that just knows, the piece that was always there, that has seen everything, we talk a lot about cultivating the witness and finding these ways to be in the room with someone, help them understand the sacred nature of the work, and build on that. So now day to day, does it always look that wonderfully beautiful? No, like it's messy and it's difficult and it's frustrating, but it's real. And so we've tried, we've built a good reputation. I feel we've partnered with the county to be able to provide services to children and families who are affected by the opioid epidemic. And through that, we really fought to teach them that this might almost sound awful, but you can't just work with children. You have to, if I have a plant that isn't thriving, I'm not just going to keep trying to talk to the plant. I'm going to do everything I can to enrich the soil, to get better sunlight, to move it to where it could flourish. And so we wanted to do that with the community. So we've expanded the work that they wanted us to do to be able to support the school system in some extent, to definitely first responders, the paramedics and the volunteer fire folks up here. So we're really trying to support the people that are the environment in which children are, becoming themselves. So that's
Yes.
the long and short of
Thank
it.
you. Oh, no, you've given us a beautiful description. Way too often, sometimes terms that are appropriated and misappropriated: spirituality, confused with religion, confused with mandates. And I think you've just given us a beautiful wholeness about what you mean by the word awaken, or to become aware, and to push the boundaries of self-aware perception and self-knowledge, and really grounding not in the mandates or expectations of a prescribed religion or sense of spirituality, but rather I hear the fullness of really being anchored in honoring the wholeness of a person, the sense of soul for you, the sacred for you, and for your whole community is to honor the wholeness. And by honor, I mean really respect and follow and guide and protect your client and your therapist intuitions. Now, that leads me to, what are the methods? Expressive therapies, specific approaches. What have you cultivated? What do you train your staff in? How do you nourish the array of therapies for your clients?
Yeah. So one thing we try to do definitely, I think, is we listen to our therapists, like we listen to them about what do they want. So what I am not a very techniquey person. I'm definitely presence and process over procedure. But tools are important, right? So we work with, if somebody's very interested in a certain type of therapy, we try to make sure they're getting the training in that, or support them in what they want to do to build out their practice within our practice. But what I try to offer when we try to do regular retreats, rather regular gatherings for our clinicians to come together. And we try to infuse those with sort of, again, that depth work. So we've done retreats where we had you come and provide some, I don't know that I would necessarily say training. I mean, it is training, but I try to really move them towards, this isn't about you learning a technique. This is about you being present with yourself and doing the work for yourself and reminding yourself why you came to this field, right? That there's something deeper, that you've struggled through something, that you've had something you had to come to terms with, and that is what brought you to this work. And we can't ever lose sight of that piece of ourselves, I think, in the work. So I try to introduce them to those kinds of experiences. We actually came together the other day to do vision boards, which was a really wonderful experience with everybody, just using, letting imagery guide us. It's interesting because sand play particularly is so important to me. And so I have found it to be such an important piece of how I take care of myself, because as a clinician, I can think myself right around whatever it is. So therapy for me to take care of myself outside of what I'm offering needs to be really somewhere away from my brain, right? Something where I can't manipulate it and I can't, I think a lot. And so I need to be able to feel and to just be present with, and symbols. I do a lot of dream work with my clients. I guess that's one thing that I do particularly. A lot of, again, like, I don't know if it would be considered an expressive therapy, but like bibliotherapy. And there is
Sure.
not, my clients
Yes.
actually make fun of me, like, oh, we're 18 minutes in and you haven't suggested a book yet, right? Like, trying to find the things that sort of jump out from other fields, art, science, whatever, to say,
Yes.
oh, there's this connection to what you're saying. I heard about this thing the other day, and let's look that up and see if that offers us any insight.
Yeah.
So I don't do a lot of sand play with my clients, which I have. And I'm probably, we joke about this here, actually, I'm probably ruined because I started with you and I'm like, well, I can't do it till I have like a million things like on the shelves ready to go. And that's not true. And so I think maybe I do it in a more imaginal space. So
Yes.
that's the actual physical thing. But if somebody's talking about, again, metaphor, like I have clients who will just roll through metaphors, right, in their session, trying to help me understand what's going on for them. And again, stopping and saying, wait a second, tell me more. Like you said, you felt like you're in a rowboat in a lake. What's around the lake? Like what kind of lake? How deep is
Yes.
it? What do you think that represents? And so really allowing them to take whatever comes up naturally to describe their experience. I suppose it's rooted in like Jungian kind of collective unconscious, personal unconscious, and being able to say to a client, so when I think of being out on a boat in a lake, that feels very serene and peaceful. But I think for some people, it might feel very frightening, very alone. Which is it for you, or is it something else, right? Help me understand, what's the boat look like? Kind of. So building that imaginal space together, so that, again, I trust that. The other thing that I do that's probably maybe a little odd, but I think in a good way, I get a lot of imagery in my mind. So if somebody will be talking and I will imagine it, like immediately I'm walking through a forest that I know well, and I think, okay, why? So I might not say to the client, hey, you were talking about your family experience at Thanksgiving, and I was all of a sudden walking in the forest, right? But I would
Right.
stop later as I'm doing notes or, thinking about my day, to think about, why did I go there? Was that for me? Was that for them? Is there something in my experience that I might be able to highlight for them that would be meaningful? Why is that what came up for me? And really trusting that. Um,
Beautiful.
and again, so I do a lot of work personally with first responders. It's a group of people I really love working with. But I also, prior to that, probably my expertise was around non-normative grief. So working with folks around suicide, homicide, overdose, sudden deaths. And I think I think a lot of clinicians shy away from grief work, particularly like suicide or homicide, these really awful ways to lose people. But I think the gift of that in my own work has been, long ago, I had to give up the idea of fixing people. I am not here to fix anything. I'm here to accompany you as you figure out what to do with what life's given you. So recognizing, I think a lot of people are afraid of that. Like, I want to know what I'm fixing. I want to know what I'm doing in this session. I don't need that. This is gonna say, I have no idea what I'm doing half the time, but we end up somewhere that's meaningful
Yes.
because I don't walk in this room believing that I need to be the expert or be the person who knows what to do. And I think that's been a real gift in all of my work, because I think it's all grief. It's
Yes.
all
Yes.
like, things did
Yes.
not turn out the way I thought they were going to, and I'm upset about that, right? And what do I do with that? Um, so I
So
think,
Jesse, I want to underscore the way that you integrate and trust your own intuitive sensibilities, that you cultivate your imagination and trust your imagination and keep safe boundaries around your imagination, that you are willing to cultivate them, nourish the metaphors within you, and allow them to emerge in a flow rather than some prescribed, rigid, follow the rule book kind of, and your emphasis on being, again, present to the person in front of you, the human being, and their grief and their loss. That full presence is about connection and authenticity that you that you bring. So I imagine that music and poetry, drawing and clay making and symbols in sand or without sand, that all of these, that your welcoming attitude, that you're trusting that the process is coming through you and not directed or mandated rigidly. And so I just want to emphasize, especially for our viewers who may be coming therapists or who may be hoping to enter the field or who may have been in the field for decades but never felt validated. And what you just did was saying, look, trust yourself and cultivate that inner sense, but don't project it or clam it onto somebody else, but to channel it. So I wanted to validate that, and then that leads me to wonder about your own roots. What is there about how you arrived into the mental health field? What is there about your life or your development experiences? And of course, this is a long pathway, which may include some early experience or some moment in your own college and university training. And I do get the sense, and I want to say that you're the kind of clinician and supervisor and director that continues lifelong learning, that we never just get it and get licensed. What are your roots? How would you describe your experience, how you arrived here and who you are?
Yeah, no, that's I mean, I think the low-hanging fruit in terms of how I became a therapist is that I had a year, I came to this later than a lot of people. I had a year in my life where I lost 6 people to death. So my aunt, my cousin, my grandmother, a neighbor who was like a father figure, a friend's father, and an old friend. And that included deaths from suicide, overdose, cancer, old age, the heart attack. So it was a very and tight, like within definitely less than a year. And so I went to counseling because I was like, this is too much. Like, I don't even know what to do with this. And my usual support systems were also grieving, right? So I didn't have them to count on or to go to. So I went to counseling. And it was a really great experience, probably from the first moment, because she validated, I kind of gave her my life history. And she was like, I don't know why you haven't been here before. Like, and it was very validating so then going back and I thought, well, I can do this. Like, this is something I can do. And so I went back to school and off we went. And everything kind of lined up. It worked perfectly. So, but I think if you go back even further, I think part of it is that I grew up, I was a change of life baby for my parents. So they were in their 40s when they had me. I have much older, 12, 13 years older than me siblings. As a lot of our generations were very stretched out in my family. And so there was a lot of just a different experience than a lot of people have in their family, I think. And I came into a family where I was very much loved and wanted, and just had people who just let me be me, right? And so I think I had this experience of when we talk about attachment, we talk about secure attachment. I had my parents, I wouldn't say spoiled me or anything like that, but really were just like, oh, you're a little human being from the moment you're born and you're all your own person and we're going to see who you become. And so there was a lot of freedom to settle into so I feel very rooted. I think the way I practice comes from that and that sense of being accepted and having people who are very curious about what I thought about things or what I felt about things, and very willing to let me think and feel and experience things. Couple that with when you have older siblings, they leave when you're pretty young. And so that disrupts attachment a little bit because all of a sudden they're not there and you're sort of an only child. So I have the experience of being the youngest, but then being an only child, but then they started having children and I'm closer in age to them. So then I kind of become the oldest child. So I have these, rooting myself in what a family system is like was it's very easy for me. Like I really understand how those things swirl around us and make us who we are. Then fast forward to when I was 14, I got in a car accident and was significantly injured, almost died, and spent 3 months in a hospital by myself. So my parents could come visit every day, but they didn't stay with me. And so I had a lot of time on my hands to think about things and to sort of experience. So I think, and then coming back to a system, I come from a very, very small town, like graduating class of 30 people, um, and a class that experienced a lot of grief in that we lost 4 classmates to suicide, starting in 6th grade and then continuing after we graduated. But I was the person who didn't die. And so my experience with grief was just very different than everybody. So I've had an experience through much of my life of being the witness to things, being somebody who's very important, very valued, but also a little bit off to the side and sort of looking in. And so I think if there's nothing else that could create a therapist, I think that's it. Like there's just sort of this sense of I feel very able to be myself. And I think that creates a safe space for other people to become themselves and to be given permission to um, find what it is that makes them them, right? And I have a curiosity about how the heck everybody ended up the way they are. So I think all those things kind of came together.
There's depth. There is depth right there very early on. There's the experience of grief and life-threatening and solitude, that even in the evenings, the aloneness, all of these come together and really seem to inform the very essential receptivity that you have to not being afraid of death and grief and loss and the complexity of that's not a simple thing. And to go back to one of the terms you used, the sacredness of being a witness. And also I sense gratitude must be just flowing all the time for you, an awareness of how precious life is and how precious each person sitting right there with you,
Yeah.
that is for you.
And how quickly it can change, right? So I
Yes.
think when again, being that a lot of my clients are coming in after a significant loss, to be able to, I've had a lot of those losses, right? So when someone comes in for suicide loss, I've lost multiple people, family, friends, clients to suicide. And so I don't have to say, oh, I know exactly how you feel, but I don't know exactly how you feel.
Okay.
But I can embody this sense of this is not unfamiliar territory to me, so we don't have to be frightened. Like we can explore it and figure out what's here together. And I think there's a strong sense of I'm not leaving anybody behind, right? I'm going to always show up. I'm going to be present as long as I can. Um, and I think people, again, it's not something I say to people, but I think they feel it and they recognize it, and that doesn't mean that I'm abandoning myself, right? I'm not overlooking what I need to be present and to be, I mean, some days I probably don't get it quite right, but overall recognizing that I too um have to be taken care of, and that we're all just, Ram Dass, right? We're all just walking each other home. And so
Yes.
on that walk, what are we going to talk about, right? What are we going to explore? What are we going to consider? What am I going to learn from you? And what are you going to learn from me? And what meaning are we going to make together that nobody else could make? I mean, I think with every, for me, it's really about conversation and connection and really finding meaning where we didn't know. There's always something. There's always something that can emerge
Yes.
from the conversation, from the experience, from the shared, from the divergence of our experience and the commonality of our experience, that those things exist together. Um, yeah, I think, and solitude is a, solitude has been a huge piece of it. I think, again, I was fortunate to grow up with parents who felt it was very important to have, um, to honor solitude, to find ways to go into your deeper self and consider what was going, and then to have people who say, I'd love to hear about that, right? I'd love to know what happened when you were over there thinking by yourself, if you want to tell me. And so I think I got great models of people who were kind of therapeutic without knowing they were. Was very fortunate in that aspect.
It seems true too that the way you've cultivated trust in yourself and how that shows up as you describe your presence with those who are grieving and the trust. But my sense is that you exude a great deal of safety, that you make it so intuitively safe that one sitting there in their deep grief, in their silence, or in their tears, or in their raging, in their confusion, can trust intuitively because you present, you show up with a great deal of safety and intuitive. The image that comes to me is a channel through which you have guardrails to keep that which is threatening outside and that which is comforting, welcoming, non-judgmental, and profoundly honoring on the inside of this channel. So your deep trust in your intuitive has to be communicating that to those who come to you. That's my strong sense of all of that developmental history and the way you didn't shun it, but amplified it and just welcomed that for yourself.
Yeah, I mean, I think I've had a life of, like, it's been a wandering journey, right? And I think it's a, a heroine's journey, right? Like, at the end of the day, it is the path I have. But I'm curious about what's around each corner, right? And where are we going next? And I think whenever, definitely working with clients, that's something that comes up. Like, I'm really interested to find out what happened this week, right? Or what's going on, or what meaning did you make out of that? And this sense of I don't know, I have a really strong sense of it's all meaningful. There's just
Yes.
nothing is mundane. All of it has rich meaning, and I may not know what it is right now, but it will be tucked away for later because it will come up without a doubt, and be meaningful, and so
Yes.
I think, I hope, I really, even more than clients, I think with my clinicians or people I connect with in the field, to be able to give people permission that they know what to do. There is, I think our field has gotten so regulated and regimented, and there's some value to that. I understand the need for it and the importance of it, but I think what it does, particularly for women, it makes us feel like we can't show up authentically and be who we are. And I think the stories, the experiences, the just general sense of what's happening right here, right now, we need everybody, and we need to
Yes.
be willing to explore. Yeah, I feel like, clients will come in and it's, what's your goal? What do you want to work on, or whatever? And they'll say, like, well, I want to feel happy. And I'm like, well, that's great. but there, there's a whole lot of other feelings that are really important and really valuable. And for me personally, I would never tell a client not to want to feel happy. We'll go where they want to, but I think I have a profound respect for all of the other emotions, particularly the darker, shadowy, difficult. Um, I love a good sorrow. Like sorrow shows love, right? There are these
Yes.
intimate partners. Um, if I'm jealous, it's because I know something that I want for myself, and that's not a bad thing, right? And kind of allowing that shadowy side of things, or the things that we have decided in our society aren't meaningful, to have meaning and to show up and to say, I see that and I value that and I honor that. And it's okay if it doesn't feel great. You're not alone in it, and we can find our way through it, and you will be more complete as a result, So I think that's an important thing. I feel like I'm carrying a flag, like, and trying to make sure we don't get lost in the paperwork and the um, treatment plans. Like, this is soul work. It's not, for me, it's not brain work. I understand the science. I understand the importance of um, the brain and body stuff, but somebody else can do that part of the lifting. I want to be with the souls. That's where I want to live.
The whole idea of meaning, that from this, if if we were to take this as an existential framework, that the depth of process is finding meaning and its array. And I think you and I are both on the same page that it is not the therapist place to interpret meaning, but rather to help the client, lift the client to find the meaning, and to find that not the first, it's like meaning in marketing, right? And the whole mental health system is caught up in that twine. But your emphasis in finding meaning for all of us doesn't mean that you are looking something up in a symbol dictionary or reading something from a theoretical, oh, this is a complex, or this is a behavioral whatever, but rather being so incredibly present that the meaning, that the client can walk the path to find, to discover, to unpack the meaning for them. And then you're helping them expand that, to move away from the social, cultural, and political arrangements, the marketing strategies, the pressure that comes on how we should be, or how we should think, or how we should feel. And what an honorable, deeply respectful place that is in the therapeutic moment with you. Jesse, you are steeped in the power of meaning, and I'd like us to turn to the symbols that you brought to share with us. If you could hold the symbol right up to the camera and describe for us its representation for you.
Wow, the first one I have, can you see that?
Yes, yes.
So it is a skull, and it is carved out of some kind of quartz. I think it has, you probably cannot see that when you look at the top of the head, there's this beautiful blue and yellow
Oh,
shimmery quality to it, and a lot of veininess, which I
could
find.
you show us in the head in the camera? And
I don't,
oh
there
yes,
we go.
holy
There,
cow, yes, it's
right?
very, oh my goodness, it's almost like it's lit from within
Yeah,
inside.
it's like iridescent, and I don't even
Wow.
remember. So I have a lot of skulls. I collect skulls. I feel very drawn. I feel very drawn to dead things. So skulls just is imagery that I really love. Um, I think of the meaning in so many cultures, right? I certainly think about like Day of the Dead, um, and kind of this idea of honoring what came before us. I think is probably what the skulls really represent, and the humanity of it, right? Like if I saw, I can see a skull and know that's a human skull versus I don't know that I could pick out, other bones and necessarily know that they're human. I might be able to take a good guess, or if there was an entire skeleton, sure. But the skull, the human skull is identifiable. And I think for so many people, it elicits fear, and it doesn't for me. Again, I think when you're born late to people and people start dying when you're very young, you become pretty intimate and pretty connected with death in a way that's different. I think, it's not something I fear necessarily or feel is a bad thing. I feel like we continue on. So certainly as a primarily grief counselor, having a lot of skulls around, I think is important to me. And I think also when I look at skulls, you see the emptiness there, like you see that something is not there any longer and has gone elsewhere. And so I think skulls very much have that meaning for me, just around like, where do we go? Like what happens when we're not here in this spot, and where do we end up, and what's left behind, right? What's that
Yeah.
physical, but also emotional, psychological narrative legacy that we leave behind. So I think that's what skulls are for me.
What are the qualities of this particular skull that you brought? Since you have a variety, this
Uh-huh.
one, and you've already mentioned hollowness and showed us the incredible vibrant colors and veins, but pausing there,
Mhm.
bringing it inward as a metaphor for you as a clinician, a soul healer. What is the connection there that comes up for you?
I think that there's so much beauty in something that we think of as not beautiful, right? Like I think death can be
Mm,
thought of as horrific, or terrifying, or kind of these darker emotions, but there is beauty in the end of things, right? There's beauty in the transitions, there's beauty, but you have to look for it. Like you have to move this around and turn it to see um
mm,
where it is. It's also just got a very nice feel. It's very like smooth, and it's perfect weight and size to sort of have with you. So I
mm,
think that's probably why I chose this specific. The others I have are, actually carved out of bone, or black and white, or I have one that's like very Southwest orange and green, and
mhm,
this one
mhm.
is um probably my favorite, because
Uh-huh.
I think when I can't even remember where I got it, but I sort of remember picking a bunch of them up, and this one had the colors that others didn't, and I was just like, oh, there it is, that's the one. Like, look
Yeah.
at his little brain lighting up, right?
Yes.
um
Yeah.
and and the beauty of it, the shimmeriness.
So much of what you just described is also reflected in our conversation so far. Your
Mhm.
appreciation, your groundedness in terms of the term turning things around, turning therapeutic approaches around, and being empty, receptive, open to allow not your head to be filled up with prescriptions of how one should be to be a competent therapist, but that receptivity, that openness to really to welcome, if it's that your bibliotherapy or poetry or the dignity of silence, of tearing together, and so all of the sensorial aspects that are in the skull,
Mhm.
there's there's an openness, and then this vibrancy that is so attractive. You've used the word beauty, and it seems that it's a beautiful metaphor for what you do. That therapy is an art form that is beautiful, and even
Absolutely.
right.
I mean, I think to to be able to do something that takes, I think so. Our logo at Bodhi is a lotus, right? And it's a lotus in all of the forms of itself. So the bud, and then flowering, and then the lotus pod, like afterwards when it's the seeds. Um, and there's something about that idea of growing up through the muck, no mud, no lotus, right? Like I think we have, and for me, that lives in death and
Beautiful.
loss and darkness and kind of that sense of, I think other people find that to be foreboding. And I maybe get a little excited because I'm like, oh, like something's coming, like something's gonna grow out of this, right? And so
Uh-huh.
I think really honoring the darkness, the shadow, the things that we disown, the pieces that we um push away and say don't have value, to me really do. Like they really are where the good stuff lies. Like that's where we find that growth
It's
and
the
the change.
richness.
Yeah.
It's so, as you had noted, that it may be the common experience to see a skull is frightening and
Mhm,
reminding
mhm.
humanity of mortality. And then part of what I'm hearing you say is to go inward, to go into the skull, to wonder about who that was, what their life was like, what meaning and purpose they left, and then the flow for yourself, to not have that staggering fear. Now, uh, if if you were to have a little conversation right now with the skull, two things come to mind. I wonder if you were to listen in some silence and see what it is the skull has to say to you today, and just we'll be silent together with you to take a moment.
Mhm. I think what comes up for me is sort of this sense of none of it's new. Like it's all happened before. We're just mulching it, right? Like we're just, I think there is a history and a knowledge and an understanding out of skulls in general. It makes me feel less alone in it, right? So when you're feeling overwhelmed, when you're feeling like I have no idea what to do with this seems really awful. I think a skull to me says like, nope, it's happened before. It felt a little different. The players were different, but the plot and the play were the same, right? And that this is that we're continuing to kind of work through um, very old stories, right? And that we're
Yes,
connected, that if
yes,
we can find our way back to the beginning, but there is no beginning because it's always beginning, right? And it's sort of
yes.
like this constant um and that went, I think there is I don't have it in this office. I don't think I have a mala, right, which is a Buddhist prayer necklace. And it's a death mala, so it has little skulls like throughout, interspersed between the beads, which I think are actually from the Bodhi tree. Um, and I love that mala because I think there's an idea, and let me preface this with like, I am not a practicing Buddhist. I'm not somebody that's steeped in knowledge around Buddhism as a religion, but I appreciate it as a way of putting meaning around experiences in the world. And so I definitely read a lot about it and understand a good bit, I think. But that death mala for me is really, there's this idea that it's like, we're already dead. Like we're already not here. I already don't exist in some universe, right? I'm just unaware of it. And so increasing awareness and really starting to understand um, that this is where we all end. This is we will all be a skull one day. Like that's
Yes,
it. And so, and
yes,
what am I going to do? Yeah, often I can hear this in my mind. My father used to say to me, um, when I was young, my nickname, my dad called me Jay Leslie. And I would say, well, this isn't fair, right? Whatever. This isn't fair. And my dad would say, well, life's not fair, Jay Leslie. And then, but he would wait a beat and then he would say, what are you going to do about it? Right. He also added to that, I don't see you complaining when it's not fair in your favor. So I think my dad gave me a lot of meaning around that idea of fairness and that idea of like, this is what it is, right? But what do you do to make that time between when you emerge and when you check out meaningful? And how do you help other people do that? And so I think the skull kind of encapsulates all of that for me, because we're all, I don't care how much money you have, I don't care
Right.
what you did in this lifetime, good or bad, you're going to be a skull one day, and so am I,
Yes.
and you won't really be able to
Yes.
tell the difference. So
Right.
I think recognizing that deep commonality of where we all end up is very
Yes.
important to me.
Um, I, and a metaphor that comes to mind
Mhm.
is to get to the level of meaning and welcoming mortality and understanding grief at depth is to get out of one's head. And your skull so invites us to get out of our head, to let it flow down to what's there, and a reminder of exactly what you just said. We're going to be dead any minute now.
Yeah.
And so, how do we make that meaningful to move beyond those prescribed, I want to be happy, or I want to become this or that. Let's move to your second symbol, because
That part.
this is going to be a beautiful connection, I'm sure.
Yeah. So it's kind of it's a bit of a twofer here, but
Okay. Yes.
I don't know if you can
Yes. We
go
can see it.
over.
Mhm.
So this is Nike,
The
winged,
goddess Nike. Mhm.
yeah, winged victory.
Yes.
It is, this one particularly is actually one that I got in Greece and brought back, because I, as you know, through my years of sand play, I make a beeline for your Nike every time I dream about her.
Oh,
Um, a very strong, I draw her all the time, like I feel very connected. And I think this idea of there is something about this particular, um, she's striding, she's chest forward, knees just, she is moving through it. She is finding her way, um, to get to some place, right? To do what needs to be done. But she's headless. And I think that's really important to me. It does not escape me that I brought a head and a headless
right.
body.
Right.
Um, I think while I am a big thinker, right, I definitely live a lot of time thinking. Um, so I think I need to sort of, Nike represents to me like taking that away and really living down in the deeper parts of myself, in the parts that can fly, in the parts that flow, in the parts that, um, there is a feeling with this particular statue that is like not on my watch. Like I will show up. I will be there. I will do what needs to be done. And I'm not even
Mhm.
going to think about it. I'm just going to like cut right through. And so I think, and she can fly to the heights. She can walk on the earth. Like she's got this meaningful
Mm.
sense of things. And so I think, but her head and her arms are gone, right? It's just all
Yeah.
center of the body and wings.
Could you
Um,
share her with us again so we could see her again, and turn her around so we can see a little bit lower? There you go. Yeah, and we can see her wings. And you mentioned the stride, the strength of her knees bending forward and walking through.
Yeah, and I
Just
actually, one you have is even her knee is higher,
pronounced.
is
Yeah,
out further, and that one really feels, that's sort of how I walk. It's sort of like I'm
very
going
open.
somewhere. I've got something
The
to do.
chest and the
Uh-huh.
wings really are open.
And it feels, I think there's something about, it's a female statue that doesn't feel over sexualized to me, and doesn't
Yeah.
feel, it doesn't
No,
take on,
power,
right.
grounded.
And
Or
strength and grounding, and
yeah,
but with the ability to
to
fly
fly.
away if needed.
Whew.
And so I think there's a lot of meaning in it. For me,
Yeah,
certainly. I think, she's a warrior, but in a flowy, winged way, right? It's a different, it's different than some other, it's not, it's not Fina, it's not this,
yeah.
it's just like, get out of my way.
Yeah,
Somebody's over
strength.
there and they need help, right? And I'm
Yes.
coming, right? And so I think there's a sureness and a sense of self that feels really validating and connecting to me. So
Fully in her body, and yet, and so grounded, determined, and yet with the ability to have the capacity of being winged. That just brings us to that sense of spirituality that is combined, not in an all head figuring, problem solving, but the dignity of being so fully grounded in the body. And I hear so much of your description of yourself in your approach to therapy as being grounded, determined, eyes wide open, very clear, and yet being with the lotus, honoring the mud and the opening. So the description that you gave of the lotus and of Nike and the wings and the petals opening up, and yet having both of them having that ground in the mud, which so much, it seems to me, has infused today our conversation. I love to connect the two symbols in some way for you. If these two were to come together and see each other, do you think they know each other?
Oh yeah, I think they have history.
They have history. And if they were to both turn to you and say something that they want you to know in your silence right now, what would, as a collective, what would they say to you? Just take a moment to hear them.
I think it would be something around the idea of that it's understanding everything that's come before, like all the things, all the history, all of the um hurts and harms and but wonderful things and growth and change and transition. Um, Understanding that exists, right? But then being willing to really just cut through and stride into the unknown, to show up, to be ready, to be present. That's where the value is, that's where the meaning is.
Powerful. And I imagine that conversations between these two could go on through their own poetic or a dialogue, an I thou, as well as building the trilogy with you, and a conversation that may happen in a journal with you posing questions to them and them posing questions to you. At this point, let's turn to an example of what you have learned from your clients. Is there a story, an example that you'd like to share that you discovered not from a classroom or training, but rather from the way you sit, the way you are present, what they taught you? Someone that surprised you, maybe, or that you discovered, or that helped you turn? What example would you like to share?
There's so many. I think one thing that's been really powerful, years, like 10 years ago, I lost a client to suicide. And in looking back and thinking about our work together, I feel confident in the work I did, the work we did together, in the ways we worked through a lot of their stuff. And when this person was a young adult, when they died, the family reached out and invited me to come to the wake, to the funeral. let me know what had happened, invited me. And I remember being really terrified to go on some level because all of my colleagues, who were not very supportive at the time around, I think this is everybody's greatest fear. So I don't think I got a lot of support from clinicians around me. Not that they didn't want to, but they weren't very. And the common refrain was like, oh, you can't, you shouldn't talk to the family and you shouldn't go and you should, that's not that, they're going to be,
Mm.
you just shouldn't go. Like, that's a liability. And I sat with myself and thought, I can't not go.
Yeah.
This is a person who is very meaningful to me, or I have to show up, right? And I went and they welcomed me. And they gave me the greatest gift in that when the wake was finishing up, they said, we're going to get everybody out of here so you can have a few minutes alone with him. And the beauty of that moment, I think, in and of itself, it was just very, I got to say what I needed to say and have some time, which I don't think we get a lot.
Right.
I've actually had a number of clients die, most of them not by suicide, just in general life happenings. And so I've had way more of that in my career than I think most people do. But this experience of a family opening up and allowing me standing, like a recognition that there was a relationship there that was valuable, and that it was private. Like, they didn't ask me what he said to me. They didn't ask me what I thought. They didn't, there was none of that. It was just, here, we want to give you time because we know that he meant something to you and you to him. I'm not crying, my nose is running. So I think what I learned in that moment that you are definitely not going to be taught in school, again, is kind of to trust your soul. Like, my soul said, this is important to do, and you can do it with dignity and ethical responsibility. I didn't go in saying, hi, everybody, I'm his therapist. I went among the other people who were there. But it created something that was very different, and an understanding of how important our role is, not just to our clients, but to everybody they affect as well, right? So I guess the lesson and all that, again, that I think about is like to trust. I'm very glad that I didn't just follow what the liability people would have said to do. And I understand it could have gone very differently. But there has been some rich experiences in the community where I've been able to, because of that and other situations like that, where real positive change has come as a result of those losses. And so I think being able to be willing to show up, I was willing to show up and be vilified or be screamed at or be whatever, if that's what they needed to be able to grieve this loss. I was willing to show up in that way. And I'm really glad I did. So I think it doesn't just happen in the room. Maybe that's the lesson. Like, the lesson is, this isn't just somebody coming to you with problems and you're helping them work through them and then they go back into their life. You go with them. You exist outside of this room and they exist outside of this room for you. And so recognizing that connection, you could pretend it doesn't exist, but it does. You can't make it not exist.
You remind us that therapy is a social and cultural event, that it is a social cultural process, not separate from, and that certainly guidelines from the professions are for safekeeping, but to not throw out the therapist's sensibilities, and again, to trust oneself, and to, you didn't do this without, you were very mindful, you were very thoughtful, you were exploratory with others, and then trusted your gut. So there wasn't an ego, I'm going to show up, which is, I think, the protective nature of why organizations and associations exist, is to get out of ego. And then you've amplified that, you've extended that to be social constructionist, if we need a term, and that is to be present, honoring the familial, then the social and the cultural, to bring that to a full honoring of the one who died, of the one who was suffering, and to honor your own grief, to honor your own loss.
Absolutely.
Jesse, what do you wish could change in the mental health profession? What do you wish you had known when you were at the stages of learning?
I guess I wish I could change. I wish I could change. You know, working in the field, there's a lot of sort of like this tension of opposites, right? Like on the one hand, I want to be like, oh, I wish I could get rid of managed care insurances, right? But they also pay the bills. So I don't know that, and they allow people to access therapy who maybe couldn't access it otherwise. So, I mean, I guess I wish I could, I don't know if this is in the field. I wish people understood, community, clients, clinicians, that it's the opposites. On the one hand, it's sacred, it's holy, it's all these things. It's also, it doesn't have to be this huge making meaning every time that there's
Right.
there's an arc to it, that it can be whatever it looks like with each person, right? And kind of allowing it to be what it is and learn from it, rather than feeling like you have to, maybe I wish I could, I think I kind of already knew this, and I don't know that I could have done it any different, but I certainly wish more people had permission to just show up, right? That presence is the most important aspect of therapy, that showing up and being here as an actual person willing to hear somebody's story is far more important than whatever technique you use or what training you've had, or what the goals are, or how far you've achieved on those goals. It really is about creating a very early on, watching the Gloria tapes, watching all these, masters do therapy, and thinking, oh, I want to be like these masters, right? I want to be a great, and recognizing the reason they're great is because they're themselves. They're showing up as a therapist. That's who they are. And so I think giving people permission to figure out, do your own work, figure out your own stuff, always be trying to understand better who you are, because the more you know yourself and are curious about your own experience, the more you're going to be able to show up for your clients in that same way.
If you had an opportunity to share a wisdom, something from your clinical experience, your life world, and everybody here gathered together, watching, being with us right now, hearing what you just said, how would you want to bring closure today? What would you say? What wisdom do you want them to walk away with and to hold within them?
I think for like seasoned people who are already in the field doing their work, I would encourage people to really think about who are the clients over their career that they have felt the most energized or reflective about, like the clients that, like, if I'm like, we want to say we don't have favorite clients, but I don't know any other way to say it than favorite. But like, to tell somebody, think of a client, what client comes to mind immediately when you think of why you do this work, and then figure out what it is, what's that intersection between that person and you, and try to get more of that. Like figure out what it is, why you were exactly the right person for that person at that time, and sell that, right? Like get out there and talk about, this is why don't be afraid to say, who you want to be as a therapist and what really lights your fire, right? Like be willing and know that that may change over time. You don't have to stay in one lane because that's the one you got in last year. Like if a door opens, walk through it. Continue to grow and become, and I think for newer like people coming into the field, I like never lose sight of why you decided to do this. Like, what was it? I see a lot of younger folks coming into the field who have been steeped in their own therapy over the years, right?
Mhm.
And I think they're coming in with a significant amount of anxiety, and fear, and kind of like, and I think sometimes they lose sight of that the reason they're doing this is because they either felt like nobody saw them and they wanted to be seen, or somebody really saw them and they want to give that gift to somebody else. So I think reminding ourselves over and over again, like, what is really the essence of why I decided to do this work, and find a way to remind yourself of that every single day so that you come back to it over and over again.
And I think that wisdom covers the self-care, the presence, and how therapy is growthful for therapists. That burnout is there when we don't do the work that is our own process, that is the truth, the
Absolutely.
ground, the honesty, the authenticity, and presence.
Yeah, well,
Jesse, it's yes,
that,
please.
and just like, I feel like I can't let this go by with that, because I do a lot of trainings on self-care, and I quote self-care, right?
Yeah.
I think one of the things that's happening in our field right now is there's this idea like self-care should feel good. And I think the thing is, self-care is really a lot more than just that. And it really is attending to the self, right? Recognizing that you exist as a whole being, and what does that being need to be able to function more fully. And so it's not always going to feel great. It's not just bubble baths and chocolate. It is continuing to return to that self and ask that, what do you need? How do I do that? What do I need to do regularly before I'm in burnout? Afterwards is a day late and a dollar short. How do we build, and anybody who's in a position of authority and leadership, to build that into your systems, to know that we need to be recognizing that we work. Sorry, now I'm going to go down we work in there's a lot of talk about trauma right now, and there's this idea of like, I will hear clinicians say, well, I've got multiple trauma clients, I don't know if I could take another. And I'm always like, well, who else is there? Like, I don't,
Right.
like, we all have trauma. We all have experienced something that overwhelmed our resources, our internal and external resources, that made us question our worldview, and that we told ourselves something about ourselves as a result. And that's really where the work is for everybody. And so I think it's all trauma. And you can't, in trauma, we are unable, if we're going to do this work, we can't imagine that we aren't going to be affected by it. And so recognizing that would be like walking through water and thinking we won't get wet. So recognizing the importance of being ahead of that, and taking care of our own trauma, our own sense of experience in the world. So that's, without going down a hole, I could talk for days on that. But
We could. I think we may need to set up another session. The amount of wisdom and honesty that you share, and the way that you have helped us build that thread bead by bead, the importance of grief and death, mortality awareness, being in the body, finding the strength, trusting the intuition, coming full circle. And Jesse, I so appreciate who you are, in addition to what you do, and how who you are ripples out to your clinicians, to the clients, and to the community that you serve. So full of gratitude today to be with you. And I look forward to another session with you.
Thank you. Rest assured that part of the reason that I am capable of practicing in this way is that I started my journey in this field with you,
A
right?
long time ago.
You a long, like 20 plus years ago. You gave me permission without necessarily saying it that way, permission to just show up and be myself. And that I returned to that. I've had many people along the way who I was really fortunate to have crossed paths with and to see that there's a lot of ways to do this, but the way I need to do it is the way I do it.
Beautiful, beautiful. And we'll pause right there on this session, and let me thank all of you again for being with us, and welcome your own internal intuitive self. Give yourself, that intuitive part, permission to be, to feel, and to explore new avenues, and the courage to be present. Thank you so much, Jesse. Thank you for joining us. I look forward to seeing you all, metaphorically, in our next session.